Community Corrections. I'm not sure which of you are going to stay at the table for that, but we welcome the other members of that panel.
Thank you. We have Captain Jenna Morrison joining us, as well as Assistant Director Malcolm McDonald. Sorry, while you were sitting. And then the Community Corrections Budget Manager, Nora Jones.
Very good. Thank you very much.
I also wanted to introduce my two community corrections managers, Kelly Kuklinski and Brian Imdyke.
Very good.
And
Thank you, Ms.
just before
Morrison.
we kick it off, just to really want to compliment the staff here that is constantly reevaluating how we're doing business. You know, Performance Clackamas has really adjusted some of the things in community corrections. And really, I just have to brag about community corrections, about, as Chris mentioned earlier, how we changed our population in our jail, because we realized that wasn't the most efficient way. And so we're really getting everybody together and wanting to ensure that we're holding offenders accountable, but keeping the worst of the worst in jail. And so we've done that. We've made a lot of amazing changes. I can tell you, I get contacted on a regular basis from people around Oregon wanting to come hear more about the CSAP program, how they could implement it. I think is it Jackson County, I said, is
Yep.
coming, a whole team from there is coming down to look at how they could replicate what we have going on, and that's really a credit to an incredible staff and hard work. So I'll
Thank you.
turn it over to Jenna.
Thank you. So I just wanted to point out our picture. We did have Lester Holt here, which was pretty exciting. He was doing his Across America, and he came and spoke to some of our clients at the CSAP program, our women's CSAP program. So Community Corrections has been involved in the MFR process for the past 2 years, and probably a little bit longer than average. But what we found out really quickly when we started was that we had a really huge data gap. And so what we've done is we've spent the last 2 years really ensuring that we have positions to collect data and analyze data and databases in place so that we can actually report on our outcomes when our plan is finally approved, which I believe it has been approved. And so next year what we're doing is we're going to be working on putting our budget in the MFR landscape. So Community Corrections, we have our new mission, and we have 5 major programs that have a shared purpose of providing justice-involved individuals their best opportunity for successful
There you go.
Oh, I'm the
Just
clicker.
trying to
I didn't know
help
I was the clicker.
Here, I can
Go
do
do
it.
if you want.
Here, we'll do it.
Thank you. I was wondering how that was
It's always
happening.
good to have a clicker.
Sorry.
Did you go to Catholic school by any chance?
I did.
You know about the clicker.
Public school.
So it's to provide justice-involved individuals their best opportunity for successful pro-social reintegration into the community, accountability for their offense, while contributing to remaining in their local community. Additionally, Community Corrections provides support to victims of crime so they can also make informed choices, recover, and feel safer. And so those are our main mission and vision. Community Corrections is broken into 2 lines of business. One is residential services and one is field services. And then we have our programs under residential services. We have our residential treatment and counseling, which is primarily our buildings in Milwaukee, which is CSAP and work release. Community service, our transitional resource, which is our transition center, as well as our probation officer who goes into the prisons. And our pretrial services, which is our newest program that we just started in February, which you've heard some about. And then on field services, primarily it is parole and probation. That's where the bulk of the parole and probation services are done, as well as our victim services, and then our operational support and our employment development and training. So typical of many departments, we have had carryover mostly due to our vacancies, which we've had some retirements, and we've had just some looking at our positions and realizing the best way to use our positions for how we're moving forward with Community Corrections. Our state funding is the majority of our funding. It comes on a biennial basis, which always makes it tricky, and we're always unaware of what we're going to get in the first year, and then if it's going to carry through to the second year. Usually the second year is a little bit more stable. As you can see, like I said, the majority of our funding comes from the state. We do have, also get general fund, and we do collect fines, and we do have a few contracts with our community service dollars. The majority of our expenses, just like probably everyone else, is in personal services, as well as our materials and services. We have no changes in our full-time equivalents. As we've mentioned previously, we are finally getting back to our pre-recession numbers. We were down to, I believe, about 94, 98 employees, and we're working back. We have 106 employees, and we're working to get those filled. And like I said, we are doing ongoing, I don't know if you noticed, but we are constantly doing recruitments for our positions. And like the sheriff said, we're trying to get the best candidates that we can, and they go through the sheriff's office background. And so therefore, it takes a little bit of time for us to get our people on board. Our budget is almost 50-50 between field services and residential services. So our key performance measures that we have here, again, these are not our MFR measures. We plan to have a whole new plan for you next year, but the ones that we wanted to highlight this year are our employment rates. With this economy, we are able to get people employed, and what we're working towards is getting people living wage jobs, so that's taking a little bit longer, a little bit more training. We also have an increased rate of our participation in treatment. Right now, you're seeing our actual and our estimated and our projected for 16-17 and 17-18 and 18-19. Previously, our participation in treatment was actually pretty low. It was around 40%. And so I credit that to my great staff and our ability to get people into CSAP, which is even much more needed now during our opioid crisis, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. We also continue to work with Bridges to Change to provide housing and peer mentor services. As we've probably mentioned in the past, Clackamas County is probably the only county in the state that can guarantee somebody a bed for at least 90 days when they're released from prison. So we don't have homeless people people coming out of prison going to homelessness. Our key performance measures, community corrections, we have, like I said, developed our strategic plan and will implement that fully in the following year. We are also the recipient, this is our third biennium of receiving justice reinvestment dollars, and those are the dollars that are given to the community to, in essence, ensure that no more prisons are built. Our last biennium, we used a large portion of that to open our transition center. This year, or this biennium, we're using that for our pretrial program, which is, studies show that the longer people spend in jail, the more likely they are to go to prison, and that the higher recidivism that rates they have. So we've put together a team, and it's a really great team. It has the judges, the defense, district attorney, Lee's on it, as well as we have some juvenile coordination to really make this team come together. And we have a lot of support from the bench on this. The other thing that we're doing with our justice reinvestment dollars is we're expanding our CSAP beds. The need for treatment is just increasing, and CSAP is one of the only programs probably in the state that actually allows people to spend as much time as they need in residential treatment. Most programs are 30 to 90 days. We have people in our in-house residential program for a year and sometimes beyond. And again, it's related to the opioid epidemic. It's really hard for people to get well, and there's such a strong, it has a strong hold on most of our clients, and it takes them a long time to start releasing themselves and also getting back into the community. We're also using some of the dollars to increase our short-term transitional leave program. Part of coming out of MFR, what we recognize is that we didn't have anyone that was responsible for our data, so we are in the process, we have someone in background right now for our policy analyst, and like I said, we're also purchasing new programming so that we can collect the actual data that we need so that we can report out on our outcomes. We are continuing to fund the Transition Center with carryover funding, and we are looking at some additional revenue streams so that we can have some more dedicated funding to our Transition Center. We have hired someone on a temporary basis to solely look at our Transition Center data. We have about a little over 2 years worth of data right now, and so her main focus right now is just looking at what our successes are, how many people we're serving, and hopefully being able to make more informed decisions as we go forward. Our revenue trends, like I stated, we are on a biennial budget with the state, which is where the majority of our funding comes from. We just recently did a time study, which will impact the next 6 years of funding, and it's always tricky. So the trend in the state has been to fully fund community corrections, and it has been on the rise rather than on the decline. So we're hopeful for the future, but we're always competing, obviously, with everyone else. Our justice reinvestment funding, like we said, we did receive it for this biennium. This is 18-19 will be our second year of funding. And then moving forward, again, it kind of depends on the legislature and what funds are available. We are right now in the process of applying for a U.S. Department of Justice grant because one of the populations that we're not able to serve right now is women with children and women, and by what I mean by that is women who have their children intact and pregnant women. And so we're looking at a grant to be able to expand our services to serve them. Overall, the population growth is not affecting community corrections at this time, but the opioid addiction the increase in opioid addiction is obviously it has been a drain on our resources. Our capital needs right now we have a lease with OLCC for our property in Milwaukee, which seemed like the lease forever. It was a 30-year lease, and it's coming due. So we have county council working on renegotiating that lease with them. And then we also have a agreement with the city of Milwaukee, but that is a 99-year lease, so we're good there. We don't have any major capital expenditures planned for the 18-19 other than doing a little bit of remodeling in our existing buildings in Milwaukee so that we can serve the additional beds, which I don't think I mentioned. So with our justice reinvestment, we are increasing our beds from 56 beds to 84 beds. And so we can't increase beds because we're stuck to our 114 beds, but what we're doing is reallocating our work release beds to treatment. And so we're reducing our work release beds. And so because of that, we are having to kind of remodel a little bit at the program to be able to do as many treatment groups as is required. And that's our budget.
Thank you very much. We have several folks who want to make a comment, and I don't put my card up, but I do want to make a quick comment. As someone who has had to, because of family circumstances, take advantage of the programs that Community Corrections provides recently. It's been an amazing adventure, quite frankly, and all the needs of my family member have been taken care of, and things are working really well every step of the way. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I think she's going to be a great success story. Thanks.
We hope so.
Yeah.
We'll get her if she's not. Commissioner Bernard.
I'm not sure I can talk.
I know. I'm sorry.
I think that the guarantee of beds, I remember Dave Dahl, Dave's Killer Bread. When I was mayor, I got a call. Dave was getting out of prison, but they don't release him unless they have a place to stay, and his brothers didn't want him at the time. His brothers. And so I got a call, and I just happened to know somebody had rental houses. But I think that's really important. That gets the numbers down out of jail, and both Sheriff Hoy and myself, or Deputy Sheriff, whatever you call him now.
Sheriff is fine.
We both served.
No ambition there. Not a resident of Clackamas County, just for the record.
That's right. But mayor might be a better. Both served on Community Corrections Commission, and I also served on various funding mechanisms. But I've come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, from when I started, when I was mayor, we fought the opening of the center in Milwaukee. Now it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And
Wonder Bread.
yeah, Wonder Bread.
It's not better than Dave's Killer Bread.
But also the home. I'm not sure, but it was Home for the Criminally Insane in Milwaukee. What?
Oh, that was a PSRB secure residential facility?
Yes, we fought that. We actually bought the land out from under the state, and we're told to sell it back at the price you paid for it, or you're going to jail. I've had dinner there. I mean, the transition center is I mean, Mary Jo and I went to Hillsborough and had lunch with the lady who started the Washington County Transition Group. You guys have taken that to another level. I mean, it's just amazing what we've done. Um, and so I think that we're a model county. We need to do something about the Milwaukee facility, something more permanent. But I think we'll get there. My challenge is if Paul, it was kind of funny you said you build it 1,400 bed jail, you'll fill it. Kind of what they tell us about 205. If we build it,
That's what I
it'll
was
fill
thinking.
it.
I don't believe the latter, but I believe the
Yeah. But
choose, do we?
I think you guys are just doing a great job, and I'm proud to be associated with Clackamas County in this area. I also served for a long time, only recently since I've been chair on AOC's Public Safety Committee and chaired many various committees on that. But I think the most important thing is for you guys to communicate that the work you're doing. Almost everyone gets out of jail at some point. Almost everyone. Some never should.
That's right.
But
95%
those
will.
people can't just go to jail and walk out with nothing. They have to have places, or prison. They have to have places to live. They need the wraparound services that we are providing. Not enough, but anyway, that's my comments.
Thank you. Well, and I think it's been shown over and over again that one of the most important pieces of being able to reestablish life is to have a home to live in, a house to live in, and not, not have that particular support. Once you have that support, the other things seem to follow that.
If I could comment on that just for a moment, just to bring to your attention, one of the things that's sort of putting pressure on on those exact services where we have transitional homes is the housing market. So we work with a private nonprofit, but they're having more and more of a challenge keeping their homes open because of the the rising costs in the
Exactly.
Portland metro area.
City?
Yeah,
Is that who you?
Bridges to
Bridges
Change is our
Bridges to
primary.
Change.
work.
Bridges to Change,
Mhm.
yeah, Bridges to Change, Central City Concern, all of those that are, and all of those folks are also involved in the county's housing advisory or task force that's working forward right now, so I think. Commissioner Humberston, and then Commissioner Schrader, then we have Ms. Coldwell, and then Mr. Magdalene.
First, I want to commend you on the work you do. You're ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, and you should be commended for that. But what I do like to try to do is, in a world of limited resources, try to figure out at least temporary solutions, if not permanent solutions, to some of those things. So when I suggest things like deputies stopping by at the school and things like that, it's a recognition that resources are limited, but there are still things we can do. In that vein, when I started in my career, it was in corrections, and they had a system called the Honor Camp system in San Diego County. You may be familiar with that. Essentially, it was a camp system in the rural areas of the county. Inmates that were doing a year or less, sentenced by the court, went to that system where they provided public service work. They contracted with the Parks Department, they would contract with neighboring cities, they would contract with the state or federal Forest Service to do firefighting. By doing that, they subsidized the cost of that incarceration. Oftentimes, the state actually paid rather than have somebody sent to the state prison system, because keeping somebody in a maximum security facility is way more expensive than in a minimum security facility. If we assume that we're probably not going to see a new jail in the very immediate future, and you have 100 beds currently at the jail dedicated to short-term sentences of a year or less, could you look at the possibility of a camp for this county, if you haven't already, which you may have done, where you would relieve those beds in the jail for higher risk inmates, and have about 100-person workforce that could do public service work, some of which the state may subsidize, and obviously other agencies might hire the sheriff's department to provide labor services. Is that something you could consider?
So what I can speak to, and I don't know all the mechanics of what that would involve, but what I can speak
I
to
do,
is the
as a matter of fact.
the 114 beds that we do have in Milwaukee are specifically for that reason. So they are to relieve the jail of people that can be released to treatment or to work release. So that's how we work in combination with the jail, is that we have 2 probation officers that are working in the jail that are identifying people who can be released to treatment or to work release. So that's where we kind of already are doing some of that relief from people that can be released.
This would be more of a minimum security custodial situation. They're not going to be going out into the community unsupervised, but it wouldn't be maximum security, which is considerably more expensive. And so you would say if you had 99 people in a camp setting, you'd have crews that would go out under the supervision of a corrections deputy that would do a variety of different public service work and then return to the facility, again, under supervision at the end of the day. You can also provide education and counseling. NA and AA come in voluntarily to help and in terms of the counseling end of things, especially for drug addiction and alcohol addiction. It's an intermediate alternative to the problem that we're facing right now. It would relieve 100 beds in the jail, which would help a little bit on your release program at the jail, which I know you're getting pressure on.
Yeah.
It's something to consider going forward, that it might be a less expensive alternative, at least in the medium term, until the time comes that we can actually afford to build the jail that absolutely needs to be done.
So Commissioner, I could speak to that. There has been a successful model in Lane County. Unfortunately, it's opened and closed and opened and closed, and now it's finally closed, I think, permanently because of funding. We just haven't had the resources to open an entirely new facility. That's a big undertaking. It's certainly worthy of looking into with where it would require some sort of additional resources to purchase the property, acquire the property, lease it somehow, and then have an entirely separate campus. I do think it's a worthy model. I can just tell you also, though, in case others aren't aware, we do have work crews and where we currently,
Good.
through community service and also out of the jail, where we have contracts with WES, various cities, various other public entities where we are out doing that. We provide work for the county, other county departments, where we're doing weed eating in the catch basins. We're maintaining a lot of areas.
And they pay you for that?
I'm sorry?
And those agencies pay you for that service?
Yes, we have contracts.
Okay,
We
good,
also do
good.
some pro bono work, but primarily it's paid work. We have contracts with those various entities. We'll go out and we'll do a cleanup along the river. We have a lot of different projects, and Jenna has really, Captain Morris has really grown that program to where it's quite a successful model.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, a few years ago, I remember working with Serena Cruz on Bridges to Housing. We helped form Bridges to Housing. Yeah, I was working on that at the inception, so that was really interesting. And I just mentioned that because I think it's been a very successful program. Let me switch to what I would call a workforce question. So you have this transitions piece and you are finding folks jobs, but I'm concerned because it seems as if you have a grant. There was a grant to do that and now you're backfilling. Is that true? And if so, is there any other way you can get the dollars for very successful?
So
program?
the transition center itself was funded through the Justice Reinvestment 2 years ago. Employment that we've had as part of our program forever.
get-go.
So, and our employment specialists are not even part of that grant. They were never funded by that grant. But to answer your question about the transition center, so yes, it is being funded. It was funded last year with carryover. It's funded next year with carryover. And we are looking at some alternatives, working in partnership with Multnomah County and some other things to find some more specific dedicated funding to continue to keep the transition center open. But we're really looking at the transition center with a analytical eye as to what's working, what's not working, what, if we are going to stay open, what are the things we must have, and what are the things that maybe we can not have or do somewhere else. And so, and we are also, we're partnering with the jail. They provide us a mental health professional on site. And we also do have some contracts with Coda and the college for GED and for drug and alcohol programs.
And we did get a grant through, we didn't receive it, but the Clackamas Workforce
Of course,
Partnership.
I was going to ask how that was
And they actually
working.
have a workforce center in the jail. So we work really closely with our community partners, Community Solutions as well, to provide the opportunity for our folks to become employed.
No, I was going to ask about that too. That's still going. It's a good partnership with,
Yeah.
with Workforce and Community Solutions both actually provide that. So you do work with both of them. So my next question's a little bit of an accountability question. So, and this is really about the system, and I don't know if you can even answer it, but you know, in our juvenile justice system with youngsters, we have this notion that there's restitution, that, you know, they kind of have to face what they did. They have to somehow have some kind of behavior that says, well, what I did was wrong. And what I've experienced as a victim of a property crime is, and having compassion for people because it was opioid related, but having a judge say, well, there needs to be some kind of restitution, and there's been no follow-up. Is that common? There's no there for restitution, in other words. In other words, in terms of requiring somebody to at least pay something towards, you know, the property crime and what they took as part of the requirement.
That is a requirement. That's, I mean,
Yeah,
when
but
restitution.
But how does it happen? And if it isn't happening, why not? And who's accountable for that? I
So-
mean, is it a parole officer? Is
So
it
parole officers work with clients to ensure that some restitution is being paid, and we work really collaboratively, and actually I think Malcolm could speak to this as well, with the courts and the court system to make sure that people are paying something. However, I will say that sometimes people are placed on probation and there's no change for some time. And so, you know, like I mentioned, people are going into treatment and they're going to be in residential treatment for almost a year. Well, during that year, they're not working. And so that is delaying some of the restitution and I understand, and it is not a perfect world, but our belief is that if people are not clean and sober, they can't get jobs that they're going to actually keep. And so our main goal to begin with is usually getting people clean and sober. And then from there, getting them employed and housed and all of those things so that they can make restitution as necessary. But you're right, it is delaying restitution payments to victims because of the long process that it is taking.
Okay, and I just was curious
Yeah,
about that
absolutely.
because it doesn't seem immediate, and I was
It's
curious
not.
as to why, and obviously that explanation. Obviously, with people who have severe addictions, which certainly was part of the experience I've had with that.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you for that. I appreciate
Thank you,
the
Commissioner.
information.
Ms. Caldwell?
Thank you. I was looking at the measure that you've got for increased rate of participation in treatment programs, 65%, and I'm assuming that that is across all offenders, that number.
Yes.
A refinement that I would like to see in your numbers is what your needs assessments are showing and how you're able to respond to what you're seeing, the data that's coming out of that information. In other words, how you're meeting the actual need rather than just looking across the spectrum. I think it would be a little bit more informative.
Okay.
Because I don't know, of the 65%, how many people really need A&D treatment.
Oh, so it's only people, so you can't get to A&D treatment unless you meet criteria. So there is an ASAM, which is there is a assessment done by a certified alcohol and drug counselor. If you don't need treatment, you're not sent to treatment. Not everybody on supervision is sent to treatment.
And that's my question. That's my point. I can't tell what the 65% needs.
65% is of the people that were assessed to need treatment, they're engaged in treatment.
Okay. So maybe just a tweak on the language should tell me it's not
Again, these are
all
going to
offenders.
change probably with our managing
Right.
for results.
I mean, that's just something I would like to see, and if there are any other needs, housing. And another one of my questions was, I'm assuming this, but I'm hoping the answer is yes, that all your treatment is including behavioral cognitive therapy treatment.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the majority of our treatment. Even in A&D treatment, it is a cognitive behavioral approach.
Thank you.
Yep.
And also
Mr. Mc-
trauma-informed. We've put all of our staff through trauma-informed care over the past year or two, and so, yeah.
Mr. Magdalene?
On the grant ran out, I guess it's the Justice Reinvestment Grant. And I know that it follows on with what Commissioner Schrader was asking. We generally don't, I believe, Dawn, as a policy, when a grant stream ends, we don't continue the program. So,
Mr. Krupp, do you
Thank
want to respond to that part of the question?
So, a grant-funded program or staffing level doesn't have a particular presumption that it would be carried forward, but it is often the case, you know, if you start with a grant-funded program, you may find that there are results from that program that are worth continuing as a policy matter for the board to continue investing in through other resources, general fund and other resources. Or there may be sort of other ways of being able to continue to the program. It may be something that is so desirable and so effective in terms of results that maybe it takes a priority or something that's already currently being funding. But there's no innate presumption that a grant-funded program would continue when the grant funding runs out, so.
well, with that grant, sometimes grants have something like a grant compliance. Was there any grant compliance you needed for the Justice Reinvestment Funds?
Yeah, so, so the and so it's a different kind of grant. Don't think of it in terms of like a federal grant. This was a state grant. We made application. We did quarterly reports to the, it's from the Criminal Justice Commission, to maintain that we were in compliance with the grant. And, we had no issues. They had no issues. We met all of our compliance, requirements.
Did they stop this type of grant program?
No, we received it again this year, and that's what we're funding pretrial with.
Okay, all right. Second question, and help me on, but when somebody's on probation, and I'm assuming, let's use 2 years. Let's say they're on probation for 2 years. What's the drug testing procedure and what is it like? And how often, well, I'll let you answer that first.
Sure. So it depends. Some people have no requirement because they don't have a drug. They don't have a drug component to their probation. But people that are generally on probation who have a drug component, they are put on. What we've done is had a drug line. So depending on kind of their level, if they're a low level, medium level, high level person, that's their need. Depends on how often they get UA'd, and so they call and they're on a random UA line, and then we UA them.
If they were high, how many, in a 24-month period, how often would they be tested?
So I would do that more period because if they're, so we do start out usually at, I believe it's 6 times a month, and and depending on how well they do. So if they're clean for 4 months, then it would go down, and they would be tested less to the point where maybe they're not tested at all.
Okay, and
Depends on the individual.
depends on the individual. So, and then medium would be a lot less.
So I think it's 6, 4, and 2.
6 point. Have you ever thought about the possibility of a hair test that gives a 90-day profile, and only do it once, every 90 days, or you could do it a couple times a year?
So we've looked into different methods. We do use some oral swabs because sometimes, because we have the majority of our parole and probation officers are female and the majority of our people on supervision are male. So that sometimes is a problem. So we've looked at oral swabs, which is done pretty quickly and is pretty, the science behind it is pretty good. The hair tests, we've looked at that. I think we looked at that when we were doing Hope Court, and one, it's expensive, and two, the reliability is a little bit questionable, and it's not something that is very accepted within kind of our realm of doing business.
We want something that's more immediate, so we're doing the instant UA, so we can have immediate feedback, so we can intervene immediately if there's a problem.
The reason I brought it up is there's more adoption nationally. And for pre-employment, as an example, this is a different issue, but for use, but the police department in New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Denver are using it just for pre-employment. Then Brazil, they use it if you want to get your truck driver license renewed. So they're looking for a long term, and I understand some of this. You want something immediate, but the half-life of heroin can be 10 minutes in a person's system. So you could have a good time. Yes.
That's not been our understanding of, and that's not what our lab reports to us.
Okay. Is it a half-life? Would it be gone in 2 days, 3 days?
That's generally, most drugs are out of your system within 2 or 3 days. And so a 90-day test may give us information, but it's not going to be able, we're not going to be able to, so part of what we do is Swift Sure. And the swiftness is, you come in today and we're going to UA you, and yes, you may have used 4 days ago and you're not going to test positive. But if we test you every 90 days, we're not going to know if you used 90 days ago, last week, yesterday. So it's not really very accurate for us.
If you did it on a quarterly basis, you would know. Possibly, if you change, just, anyway, would you like to do a window bar and just listen to somebody besides myself because they're the expert, I'm not?
I mean, we're always open to listening to getting more information, sure.
Okay, thank you,
And
Mr.
then,
Magdalene.
could we just get a better hand, could we just see the compliance report that you did for the grant?
Sure, we can give that to you.
And, thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Savas, and then we're going to take a break after
So,
this.
and I'm going to ask later in the afternoon, this is not targeted towards, or the question's targeted towards the sheriff's department, but Jenna, you mentioned earlier in your comments that you've used carryover to fund, to carry on a program, I guess. And Nancy earlier mentioned that the concern about the carryover shrinking, obviously, as you fill positions. So my question is, knowing that the carryover from unfilled positions is, that as you fill positions, you can have less carryover, that's natural. But if we are leveraging some of those unfilled positions and using some of that carryover to continue programs, how do we account for that? How do we see that as a budget committee?
It's in the paper.
You can answer, Dan?
Yeah, so I guess we're not quite clear what you're asking.
Well, I mean, it's a question in general, so I'm not necessarily asking about this particular, I'm just kind of curious overall, and maybe Nancy's the best person to answer the question, but if you've got 10 unfilled positions and you've got a carryover that matches that cost, but let's say that something else in that whole department is being used, that capital, if you will, that money, that revenue is being used, to bring that down. How is that going to be added to a budget line above the budget? I mean, I'm just kind of curious how do we track that?
So I
How do we
believe,
track what carryover is not being used?
Can I take a stab at that? I think we are seeing it. We've seen it in a number of county funds where the beginning fund balance of a year is X, and then the projected ending fund balance of that year is X minus
Right.
a bunch of dollars. And I think, in my observation, I brought it up before, and I recognize Chair Bernard's out of the room, but yes, the county has AAA bond rating. But a number of funds are decreasing their fund balance to continue current operations. But I think you see it at the fund level. I mean, it's for budgeted positions, but as positions get filled, there are less salary savings during the year, as you noted.
Yeah, and I just think it needs to be more.
Yeah. So, and as you're looking at each of the summaries for each of the budgets and looking, the history of the ending fund balance and the history of the beginning fund balance for each of the, kind of gives you some sense as to what's happening. And in some particular cases, we have a budget coming up here, I think next, where the drawdown on the fund balance was to the point where we needed to put together some general fund support. In other cases, chances are you're always going to end up with, you don't plan it in your budget, you plan for a balanced budget, but over the course of the year, you're going to have vacancies and other savings. It's going to become part of a history of ending fund balance that becomes the beginning fund balance for the coming year. And every fund and every activity is going to be different with respect to whether or not there's a risk involved with that, or whether or not it's a comfortable history that assures that the service delivery is going to be able to be maintained. So,
Well, I understand, we can see that at the macro level, right, as far as in any fund. I'm talking about at a lower level of detail or a deeper level of detail. How would that be identified to make sure, frankly, because it really becomes, let's say those positions are suddenly filled, then that's going to mean that there's less ability to, if those monies are all committed towards funding those 10 positions, let's just say, and now you're taking away monies that were being used for a program, let's say, that program's effectiveness is going to fall. That's going to be measured in managing for results. But the question really is that number one, be able to track that. And it doesn't seem to be, it's going to skew, I'm afraid, our results if that's being leveraged for other operations and done differently. So how do we track that equitably?
well, I think you can see it in every budget that comes before you, and then you take a look at what's going on with that history of ending fund balance and beginning fund balance. And for those situations that may be driven by vacancies, that's relatively easy to see when you take a look at the history related to the number of vacancies. We heard earlier with regard to the sheriff's operations budget, because that they've been very effective in filling vacant positions there, that's tightening up their estimates of what would be ending fund balances for the ensuing years as a result. And that's going to mean we're going to have to be sharpening our pencils and rolling up our sleeves a bit as we look and plan for future budgets for the operations side of the sheriff's budget. And it's going to be different. There's going to be a different answer to that for every department, but you can actually see it in the roll-up there when you look at the vacancies, you look at the fund balances, both beginning and end, and you look at the history over time.
I understand that at the macro level.
Yeah.
I guess I'm talking about a deeper level to keep that accounting and those monies being committed for those unfilled positions.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it here, so.
Perhaps maybe an easier way to quantify that would be to look at the budget to actuals, because, and again, you can see it at various levels, but if you look at what was budgeted for personnel versus what was actually spent, you can get the delta there for personnel and also for the other categories. So you can see, say, what salary savings were, and then looking at the other categories, you can see if it went somewhere else or if it remained and stayed in fund balance. But I think that the best way to get to what I understand you're saying would be to compare budget and actuals by expenditure category.
Yeah, and I think it's about how it affects the rest of the budget. I think we're on the same page. I'm just talking at the level of detail, keeping, as it relates to managing for results, to keeping all those other activities equally funded, and if not, how that is called out separately, where those monies were diverted from the revenue that was unspent for unfilled positions, where that was shifted. That almost how that was actually done, and what percentage was used.
Well, again, the way I would look for that information would be to compare budgeted expenses or revenues, both, versus actuals and the pattern, so you can see what is being under or overspent by category.
Right, I understand that.
Okay.
Right, thank you very much.
At a program level.
I see no other question cards up at the moment, so I thank you very much for the time you've given.